Yeah, so the more that people learn about climate change and the reality of the crisis that we face, the more likely it is that feelings like this are going to come up for people. Um, Anxiety is just one. People are familiar with probably with this concept of climate anxiety or eco anxiety, but there may be all sorts of other emotions like sadness or shame or anger. And in climate psychology, we talk about these as powerful emotions that can be difficult to bear. Now, we might also be feeling positive emotions like excitement or hopefulness. We might be feeling a whole mix of emotions. And in some ways, it's not so much which particular emotions we feel, because, as I say, probably at some time we feel all of these or several of them simultaneously, including those that are in conflict with each other. But it's more really to do with how we deal with our emotions, so how we negotiate any tensions or conflicts that we feel. And it's how we negotiate our emotions, how we manage our emotions, that to a large extent shapes our response to the ecological and climate crisis. And it determines whether the responses that we have are adaptive or maladaptive on personal levels and ecologically. So just something on eco-anxiety. So this is, there were some studies that were done before COVID. I've just conducted a population survey as part of my job at Scottish Government in the summer. We've not published the results yet, so I can't tell you about that, but I did put some questions in there around climate emotions, so that will be really interesting to see what comes out there. But before COVID, there were already a few studies that were finding that a large proportion of people in the UK were experiencing stress and worry. So it was around a third, if you look across these different studies, that were reported feeling anxious, overwhelmed, had high or very high stress levels. Results were higher for young people. And as we know from Climate Psychology Alliance and the psychotherapists that are part of that group, that there's evidence there of rising levels of anxiety among children. And this BBC Newsround survey, which was conducted in 2020, of about 2,000 8 to 16-year-olds, found that almost 3/4 were worried about the state of the planet, of whom a quarter were very worried. 1 in 5 had bad dreams about the climate crisis. 3 in 5 didn't think their voices were being heard. About 2/3 thought that people in power weren't listening to them enough. And about 1 in 5 didn't trust adults to tackle the challenges that climate change presents. So, if you're feeling anxious or worried or sad or angry, the key message here is that you're far from being alone. There are many others that feel the same way. Now, the thing is, though, is that whilst these feelings might be difficult to experience, there's a perspective that actually they can be understood as appropriate responses given the severity of the crisis that we're in. In fact, if you're not feeling any of those emotions, that might be a sign that you're somehow not in touch with the severity of it. But as I say, it's how people regulate these difficult emotions in ways that's healthy and that motivates positive action rather than where it becomes a mental health issue. And we know in Scotland, pre-COVID, something like 1 in 4 adults were affected by mental health problems in any one year. And our mental health services are already under-resourced and overstretched. So that's that. Now, what is actually going on psychologically? Now, oh, here we go. So, well, anxiety arises when we perceive a threat, and we might not be consciously aware that we're perceiving a threat. But climate change poses profound psychological threat in various ways. So it challenges, who we think we are as individuals, as a society, our sense of worthiness, of being good people, the ideas that we have about our future. what we thought our future was going to be like, as well as just posing an actual kind of existential threat to our lives for some people in some situations. Now, this perception of threat and the stress that's caused is so this equilibrium is created in the body, okay, and this is kind of biological and psychological. Now, the human tendency is to want to alleviate stress and associated emotions like anxiety through defences and coping strategies, with the aim of returning to baseline functioning as soon as possible. So this is just part of normal human functioning. And that's because prolonged stress can create major health problems involving exhaustion and illness and ultimately leading to death. Now, the defences and coping strategies that we use can have outcomes that are adaptive or maladaptive on personal and or ecological levels, so they can bring positive or negative benefits. And there's a whole range of contextual forces that influence how we perceive threat, how stressed we feel, what defences and coping strategies are used, and there's all kinds of factors that affect how effective the coping strategies are that we do use. Now, the thing is that these processes are also largely played out below the level of conscious awareness. So if we look specifically first now at kind of what we might call maladaptive defences or coping. So these are things which inhibit our ability in some way to deal with the reality of the situation. And they have kind of emotional and cognitive and behavioural dimensions. So I'm not going to go through all of this now in detail, but just to say, why would we have maladaptive strategies? Well, it's because there are benefits to that. It defends us from feeling these difficult emotions. It protects us from having to take responsibility or taking significant action. It can enhance our self-esteem, protects our sense of self, can absolve us from feeling guilty and things, and defending against helplessness and hopelessness, so particularly the diversionary activity there, reasserts a sense of being in control. So all of these things are very attractive, right? So we can see how tempting it is to fall into one or other of these, and all of us will be doing it at some time. So on the adaptive coping strategies, these are ones which help us to adjust to the reality of the situation. So they stimulate responses which are appropriate and proportional. And so this focus here on emotion regulation is about how we engage with and work through our emotions in a way that's healthy. Now, as I said at the start, facing up to the reality of our situation can trigger all kinds of emotions. Now, often these emotions are called negative, but in climate psychology, we prefer to just call them difficult because, all emotions have a purpose. They're not some sort of evolutionary mistake. But because they are difficult, that's why it's a common defense is to want to avoid feeling them, either through suppression or other strategies. And because these psychological processes are often happening unconsciously, we might not even be aware that we are doing this, that we are actually suppressing our emotions. And in research which I did as part of my PhD quite a while ago with sustainability professionals, even people with strong pro-environmental values have a tendency to want to suppress difficult emotions about this out of fear that they'll get stuck in these emotions and be unable to function. Now, in the short term, in certain situations, it might be appropriate to suppress emotions. So it might be, that it's not safe for someone to express them in a particular situation. But it's when the coping strategy is used all the time that it becomes a problem, because suppressed emotions don't just go away. They go into the body and they kind of steer us from behind, and they can re-emerge much more kind of intensively. Suppression takes effort. It's psychologically and physically tiring. And it also diverts resources away from cognitive resources away from other tasks. And there's a whole kind of body of literature around the negative health consequences associated with suppression of emotion over the longer term. So the key then is, how do we engage with our emotions in a way that is that's helpful. So emotions direct our attention, they guide our behaviour, they're integral to decision making and to our ability to retain and act on information. So they perform a vital function. And I kind of came up with this graph one time. I was trying to explain it to some people, and so I'll go through this now as well. The idea is that a kind of a healthy sort of adaptive emotion regulation involves working through feelings to some sort of resolution, so they don't get stuck in the mind and the body. And what I'm showing in this diagram here is like a low level of engagement to high, and then how sort of adaptive that is. So in this kind of low corner, this low engagement is where there might be kind of emotional avoidance going on, suppression, dissociation, not very healthy in the long term. Equally on the high side, that could be where people are kind of overwhelmed or consumed by emotion. And again, that's not great long term either. In this middle part is where we're giving space to the emotion. We allow ourselves to feel it, but with some sort of mindful detachment. So we can think of this metaphor of being like a fire, you're near a fire. Now, if you were kind of in the fire getting burnt, that's on the high side. If you're so far away from the fire, you can't even feel the warmth, that's on the low side. But you want to be in this sort of middle section where you're close enough to feel the warmth, but you're not getting burnt. So there's a whole range of practices that you can use to help to regulate your emotions and to be in this kind of middle space, including talking about it with people, which you're going to be doing shortly in the Climate Cafe. Also expressing it through kind of writing or creative work or artistic work, prayer, rituals, other spiritual and religious practices, qigong, tai chi, yoga, things which help to move the energy through the body so it doesn't become stagnant and stuck. So there's lots of kind of different approaches that we can take there. And the idea here is that rather than sort of these emotions driving us from behind into maladaptive responses, that these difficult emotions are brought into our conscious awareness where they can be worked with and used creatively. We can harness them. So I'm going to just finish here with a few tips on helping to manage difficult emotions. The Climate Psychology Alliance has a therapeutic support service for people, where it offers a few free sessions to people that really need it. And what's really interesting is how just simply knowing that it's normal and common to feel these emotions for a lot of people already does a lot for them. A lot of people feel very alone with these feelings, and they think that there's no one else that is feeling what they're feeling, because they're not talking about it, or the people that they are trying to talk about it to just are in that low engagement bit. They can't handle it, so they can't have a conversation there. Recognizing that these emotions can be interpreted as a sign that you are actually connected, so it's a healthy thing, it's a good thing. Now, again, part of the practice of mindfulness practice, which I teach as well, but it's this sort of checking in with yourself. How are you feeling right now? Where are you on this scale from kind of low to high? If you're feeling kind of too intense in an emotion, you might want to just back off a little bit. If you're feeling really detached, maybe you want to get a bit closer and start feeling a little bit more. taking breathing spaces. I don't know if a lot of the people on this call are activists. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the risks of burnout. So, it's recognizing in yourself where you are on a scale from, healthy and being able to cope, being inside your window of tolerance, if you're familiar with that model, to being on the verge of burnout. Having a sense of perspective. It's not all on you. This is collective effort. And there's only so much that you can do individually and with others. And then, this idea of how useful it is to actually talk about how you're feeling with others who are going to just listen and not judge you. So the final point that I just want to make is that it's really important to acknowledge that any kind of conflicts and tensions that we might be feeling within us, around us, we don't need to feel positive all the time. This idea that we can't allow ourselves to feel these difficult emotions. We don't have to be hopeful and optimistic all the time. It's okay to feel mixed emotions. All of us face ethical dilemmas. And all of us at some point will be in one of those kind of maladaptive coping strategies, in some form of denial at some point. And that's understandable because it is scary. So none of us are completely right or wrong. There's nothing about this that's that black and white in terms of how we're responding to things. So when we kind of realize this, that realization can bring I find anyway, a sense of humility, which then can help us to relate to one another with more compassion and forgiveness as well. And that includes people that you might perceive to be, on the other side, as it were. So that's a rattle through some of the theory and stuff around climate anxiety. And I think we're probably almost bang on time to go into the climate cafes. So I'm just going to show you. The next slide is just basically my contact details. And if you're not familiar with the Climate Psychology Alliance, that's our website there.